So the next part I want to talk about is called I'm going to use the word client, but now we call it patients. Or on our forms it says patients. Because if you're working for an outpatient program or an inpatient program, specifically outpatient, sometimes they call them clients, but on our forms in New York State now it's all patients. So I'm just going to say they're interchangeable, client, patients. So we're going to call it client in this case, because I like the C's. It's called a client-counselor relationship. What does that mean? What does that mean? I'll just tell you here, this has to do with what I was talking about before, the Therapeutic Alliance. This Therapeutic Alliance, which is part of the client-counselor relationship. There's an alliance here between these two. Okay? Which we call a rapport. And I'm just going to say this for the people who haven't taken the CASAC exam. Remember this word, rapport, because this is going to be on the exam. What is the primary objective of that your first interaction with a client? The first time you're meeting a client, whether it's probably to do the assessment, but it could be where they've already had the assessment and you're going to be their counselor and you've got their paperwork and you're going to be their counselor. What's your primary objective of that relationship? And I'll tell you, this is on the exam. The primary objective of that is to establish a rapport. So you can work in collaboration and build this client-counselor relationship. The primary objective of that initial meeting is to establish a rapport. And you'll see that answer. That's one of the questions on the CASAC exam. Now, how do you do that? Shout out anybody. Be a good guy?
By aligning yourself with the client.
Okay, so when we talk,
that's that therapeutic alliance.
We're going to talk about that.
You start with a patient.
I know what you're trying to say. Yes. And that's going to be part of the motivational interviewing, which is later on, or the motivational interviewing assessment. That's called empathy. You're going to have empathy. And I have another course on cultural competence, but your cultural lens, you got to take off all those biases, prejudice, preconceived generalizations, right? All these things you have to take them off and look at them like a blank slate with empathy. You want to be empathetic. You want to meet them where they are. This is client-centered. Client-centered therapy. You want to meet them where they are and establish a rapport through a process, I won't write it out, through a process called genuineness, which I'm going to talk about later on.
These are all the principles of a social worker, right? These are all the things that they...
Mm-hmm. If you have...
That's what I learned, and you being a master's now in
social work, human services major,
yeah.
This is counseling 101.
Right.
And when I teach this over at the college, and when I teach documentation too, but it's all about counseling. Even this, ethics, is about counseling. Because this is how you develop a client-counselor relationship. If you know what those ethical standards are, and your morals are good, and so you're really building on this ethical standards that you have, and you understand what the patient's rights are, and you understand what the Therapeutic Alliance, how to build that, that's what's going to make you a good counselor.
For all those CASACs maybe who aren't social workers or don't have degrees or whatever, they're going to, this will be new to them.
Well, this is what we teach counselors. This is what this is part. What I teach over at the college, at the community college, people that are studying for their CASAC, it's all about counseling with me. We can be learning whatever course you're taking. I'm always going to put in, that this is a counseling course. This this is an ethics course to be an addiction professional or addiction counselor. But this is all about counseling. This is how you do it. This is why we learn ethics, to be able to develop this counselor-client therapeutic alliance or relationship. Okay, is anybody, any questions on that? Okay, why would we need to do that? Anybody shout out.
To gain effective treatment?
To gain effective treatment. It's very effective. This is very effective. Building a therapeutic alliance within the confines of the counselor-client relationship based on establishing a rapport, empathy, and genuineness is exactly that. But why, well, I'm asking the question here. The question is, how can that go wrong? How can that go south?
Without building a rapport?
But just, if you don't build a rapport, if you're judgmental, if you judge the patient, if you judge the client when he sits down, suppose a guy sits down to do the intake and he's been sent there because he's a probation officer, because
Right.
he's a rapist.
He's gonna distrust you, this client is gonna distrust
No,
any.
I'm talking about you as the counselor. He's
What?
raped somebody. He's a rapist. But what about if he's a murderer? What about if he's done 20 years in jail? He's in alcohol and drug problem. But part of his parole is he's come out and he's actually murdered someone, and he's 20 years in jail. You're going to judge him? He's already been judged, but you see why you have to have that? Because your own personal biases, we all got them, and I teach this in cultural competence. But your own bias, prejudice, that's why you have to have this framework, because if you judge someone, you could ruin this. You could say something stupid. You could ruin this. This can go south, as we'll call it. This could take a nosedive. Right? Would that be easy to do? Of course, yeah. You're saying, yeah, that's a yes, right? You could do that. You could do that deliberately if you wanted to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You could really mess somebody up if you wanted to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you had a prejudice against them. You could really screw somebody over, right? That's why we have ethics. That's why we have that standard. Okay, so how could you do that?
What?
Screw somebody over.
Oh, how can you?
Think hard. I'll give you an example. I'm not going to give you the answer though. In this relationship, there is an exchange of power. Who's got the power?
Counselor.
The counselor, right. Especially if somebody's on parole, probation, something like that, you can put them in jail, really. But psychologically and literally, you have all the power in the relationship. In this relationship, you have power in this relationship. This is not egalitarian. You're not equal here. Especially if you're sitting in your office, like for example, I'm sitting in my office. You got your master's degree, your undergrad degree, your master's of science degree, you got some other, or you got your KSAC, and you got this other award that you got from your college, and you're wearing your college ring, and you've got the council, you have power. And if you don't have good ethics, or an ethical, this is why we need ethics, but that's why we can't just base it on virtue ethics, because we don't know. Anybody, can end up, this field is not for everybody. But you have power, and you can use that to your own advantage, couldn't you?
Right, so that's why
Right.
they have the canon of ethics. And
That's why they have a canon of
power
ethics.
under wraps.
That's why we have canon of ethics. But that's why we have clinical supervision. That's why we have peer review. That's why we have utilization review. That's why we have quality improvement. Because we're gonna have bad apples. Right? So, how could a counselor take advantage of that? What could he do to make this, what could a counselor do with all the power to this person to make this relationship nosedive?
Be judgmental?
Be judgmental, right? Could judge them,
Not provide
not provide good care,
counseling?
not stay on top, not study, not be taking training courses like this, not be, and I'll show you part number 17 of the Canon of Professional Ethics. We are supposed to update ourselves as to new science and research, which is coming out all the time. I mean, there's so much new stuff coming out, based on the DSM-5 and other, changes to federal law, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. More people are going to have access to treatment for substance use disorder. More people are going to be getting treatment. So, you could, but a counselor, because they have the power, could take advantage of that. There's one thing I'm really looking for here, though, because there's one warning that's
That what? That
there's a way that
the council,
the counselor can take advantage of this this.
by telling the client what to do? By-
No, well, I mean, you could tell the client what to do, he's probably not gonna listen to you because we don't do it like that.
Is one way?
There's one thing that they can really do to prey on this person.
Oh, sexual.
Right, okay, exactly, thank you, yes. Okay, you got that, Karen?
Mm-hmm.
Sexual
A
implications.
counselor can be, if he's not careful, and this goes both ways, by the way. This goes both ways, okay? A counselor can sexually prey or sexually take advantage of the power in that relationship. Do you understand that?
Yeah, but
So-
I think that's a given, and everybody knows that that's just,
Okay,
no.
well, when we get to the canon of professional ethics, and when we get to the other ethical standards and ethical principles, forget about, yes, all those ethical principles and the legal principles like that, but if you do that and anybody finds out, you're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your license, and you're never going to work in this field again. So, if you're listening to me all the way in the back, you want to ruin your career? You want to throw all your training away? A master's degree costs me $160,000 education. You want to throw that all away? Sexually prey on or sexually take advantage of a patient.
Did you ever hear of any cases like
Yes,
that?
yes.
Oh,
Yes,
Oh.
remember that case?
oh.
And I know several cases where counselors have lost their credential.
So what happens?
Oh, yes.
Isn't it very common?
No, it's not, Tara.
Okay.
It's not common, okay? What does happen, though, is it happens and nobody finds out about it. If I find out about it, I'm saying something. You see something, say something. If I find out about it, I'm saying something about it. Or if a counselor tells me, I'm reporting it. Or if a patient tells me that the counselor did that, I'm reporting the counselor to my supervisor. And it's going to go up the chain, and it's going to go to Albany. It's going to go to OASAS, and they'll have they have an investigation, and they can revoke somebody's credential, and they do, or they revoke it for 6 months, and you have to get other training, But if a counselor has sex with a client, you're going to lose your license. How about if a counselor has sex with the client's parent? Is that okay?
No, of course not.
Of course not. You cannot.
Within the family-
Sorry, okay.
Within the family, there can't be any such thing.
Right. There can be no sexual contact with a client or a family member. Ever. Is it okay for 2 years after treatment?
You're not supposed to.
No, never.
Never.
Never. Did you study study that in grad school
Yeah.
for social work? Yeah. Never, right, exactly, never. 2 years after, family, friends like that, never.
And they could, if something like that should happen though, and someone finds out, someone can report you, and you could lose your license.
Absolutely.
That seems a bit harsh. Seems a bit harsh. 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, you see this person, you always had a thing for this person, and something suddenly happens that ignites, and if someone finds out, you're gonna lose your license.
Yes, it can
Oh
be
my
reported.
gosh.
It can be reported.
Maybe the thing is never to become a counselor.
It's not for everybody.
Uh,
This field is not for everybody.
wow.
I say that in my other training and in that my publication. Good counselors make good listeners. Good counselors are worth their weight in gold.
I mean, I can't see a counselor really having a sexual relationship with a client,
I
because
can.
clients, I mean, yeah, how? I mean,
They're vulnerable.
because they're vulnerable, but
They're
actually,
vulnerable. And
but
that's a
actually
turn on. That's a turn on to some people.
but the person, you as a counselor, looking at this person who needs so much help, I would think that the first thing would be, why would you even, well, I guess just the word vulnerable, just that this person is vulnerable adds a bit of, excitement.
Appeal. And excitement.
Appeal,
And it's a
yeah.
taboo. Okay? So
Yeah.
when we were talking about virtue ethics and morality, if that's a little bit questionable there, if it's a little bit questionable, you could fantasize about that and eventually act on it. Is fantasizing about that, is that okay?
That's normal behavior,
Is that a problem?
as long as you don't tell anyone. That's normal, to fantasize, just don't tell anyone.
Oh. Yes, that is going to happen.
Of course.
That is going to happen, of course. That's enough out of you, miss. That's going to happen. Is that fantasy that could creep in. But if that could, when we talk about motivational interviewing, in the confines of the counseling session, you cannot do that. Absolutely not. What we call decompartmentalization. You have to. The genuineness in the report is built on presence in the therapeutic relation, the counseling session. So if you're in the counseling session with someone, you cannot fantasize about having sex with them. That's when we get into transference and countertransference. You have to get that out of your mind because you have to stay focused on the counseling session. But that's why, this field is not for everybody because you have to be disciplined, self-disciplined, and you have to have a code of ethics and have a high moral standard because it's easy to take advantage of someone because they're vulnerable because within this relationship there is an exchange of power and the counselor has all the power. For the most part, has all the power. So you have to, it's all about counseling, but you understand that. That's what's going to happen as you progress in this field. That's going to rear its head. You're going to fantasize, and you have to get that out of your mind because you're there for another reason. And if you're a highly skilled, highly trained professional counselor, that won't become an issue for you. It will not be an issue. What happens? I'm going to tell you what that's called. What happens when that happens? And this is what you want to avoid.